by the disorder, but the ability to operate outside of emotion, the ability to not be guilted into things, the lack of people pleasing. I think when you're people pleasing, you're operating from a place of need. I need someone else's approval in order to justify this decision or in order to feel good. And I've never benefited from other people's approval, which again is not to say that if I'm doing a job and my supervisor likes what I'm doing, obviously that's a good thing. But I don't make decisions based on a need to be liked. And I don't think that anyone should be making decisions based on a need to be liked. Certainly, I would prefer to be liked. I would prefer to get along with people. But I think when you are making choices because you need someone else's approval, it's potentially problematic for a large host of reasons. Most of my friends and family understood. They all knew that I was different. My husband is a perfect example. He lived through most of this with me. And yet it wasn't until it was in a book that he was able to say, oh, I understand this differently. He would take my actions or inactions personally, as if I just loved her more or loved her better, she would feel differently or react differently. And I think now he understands, oh, this actually really has nothing to do with me. And so when I was dating others, I think I would go into different relationships thinking, maybe this is going to be the relationship that gets me to the emotional point that I seem to be lacking. And they never did. Now, what I've come to understand is they never would, because it wasn't about the other person. It's what I was working with. But I didn't get that then. I would end up being frustrated and ending up having to mask a lot in relationships, faking emotions that I wasn't having, faking experiences that I wasn't having, and it was very lonely. I think one of the reasons that my relationship with David was so special so quickly was because he was one of the only people that I did reveal myself to when I was a kid. We met in a summer camp just before going into high school, and we dated for that summer, and then we broke up. He went off to college. And we kept in touch and then reconnected in my 20s. I had to do a lot of, work. I had to do a lot of figuring things out, and so did he. So when we reconnected, I think that it speaks to his patience that he was able to sort of understand and help me manage a lot of this stuff. But I remember sitting with David, and I really was just extremely candid about I didn't feel things and I didn't experience guilt, and I kept waiting to get the look from David, but I never did. Really, for the first time, I could have some semblance of a normal life if I chose a person like this with whom to spend my life. I would never have to mask. I could just be myself. He didn't like that I had these destructive urges. He didn't like that I was breaking into homes, go figure. And we had to work through it. But he also had to understand that any coping mechanism I came up with, even if it was a positive one, wasn't going to increase my affect. I was never going to be as affectionate as he is. My husband is very affectionate. He's very emotional. So for him, when I wasn't affectionate, when I wasn't emotional, he was taking it personally, as if this was a choice I was making. I'm not being affectionate with you, or I don't have these emotions the way that you have these emotions. But what he needed to understand is my emotional experience is different than yours. My love is different, but that doesn't mean it doesn't count. I'm never going to match your emotional intensity. I just don't have it. It's not because I don't love you. It's because I don't have that intensity that you have. Our journey to becoming the solid couple that we are today was relatable in the sense that we had to do a lot of therapeutic work. And I think that the more people engage in therapy and the more people engage in getting to know themselves, first and foremost, the better partners that they will be for who they choose to spend their life with. My kids are younger. The conversation is a bit adult for them. They understand the word sociopath, but I have explained it to them using a more complete definition. Certainly they know about this book. They know about that word. They certainly are going to grow up with a different understanding of the word than their friends. But they see me as someone who is less emotional than daddy, but I've noticed with neurotypical parents is that so much of their reaction to things is sort of built into how they parent. The neurotypical parent suffers from a lot of guilt and a lot of second guessing with parenting, and I don't seem to have that, which isn't to say that if I make a mistake, I'm not upset about it, but I don't really experience a lot of guilt with my kids, and I don't ever use guilt with my kids. Let's say my oldest comes home, he has a bad grade on the test. His father is going to be frustrated, and how could this have happened? You studied, and doesn't this matter to you? And we have to do better. Whereas I don't have that reaction, but I also know that that allows my child to have their reaction to the test. So, and I find that in parenting, so much of a kid is having to navigate their parents' response to something as opposed to being able to process and deal with their reaction to what happened. So I might say, yeah, this is a bad grade. How do you feel about it? And then we have the conversation about how my child feels about it as opposed to how I feel. He's not having to deal with my disappointment, which again, it doesn't mean that I don't care about his poor performance. It's just that my feeling about it takes a far backseat to his feeling about it, which I think is better in a way. My son recently wrote a speech on FOMO, fear of missing out, and he wanted me to weigh in on it, and I was able to have that conversation with him, which is, this is actually something mommy has never experienced or doesn't experience, but you do, and it's so interesting that you can process it to the extent that you can write a speech about the fear of missing out, where it comes from, how it impacts your life, and how interesting is it that we can come to this topic from two very different places. When you're talking about sociopaths in fiction, I think that it can be detrimental in that it perpetuates this very one-dimensional composite. The first thing that people think about, neurotypical people anyway, my understanding is fear and monster, serial killer. These are all largely negative associations, when in fact, sociopathy is just a personality disorder, and it deserves to be understood beyond the sensational one-dimensional characterizations that it's become largely known for. You know, you're showing these people as being singularly bad with no ability to feel, period, and that's not accurate. And when you are someone who sees themselves in a sociopathic checklist, but everywhere you look, the sociopath is portrayed as someone horrible, why on earth would you ever admit to that? It makes it more difficult for people like me to speak up. And I mean, even as a child, I understood kids who say they don't feel remorse are blackballed and cast aside and not involved in things that they should be involved in. If people understood that sociopathy is so much more than these extreme characterizations, there would be more compassion and there would be more treatment. Wednesday Addams is sociopathic. She meets most of the criteria. She's criminally versatile. She has trouble making and forming bonds. She has a low affect. She is manipulative. She's cunning. She's extremely charming. And yet I believe that Wednesday Addams offers a much more complete version of the sociopathic profile, because in addition to all of those quote unquote bad things, she's also capable of experiencing grief. She struggles to form bonds, but she can do it. She's very loyal to her friends. She is very loving to her family members. And that piece of the puzzle is largely missing in the overall understanding of sociopathy. You see that she can feel, she feels deeply. She feels differently than a neurotypical person does, but that doesn't mean her feelings don't count. And I've found that parents who watch that show with their children who resonate with my story, it opens up a narrative for them that goes beyond that monster stereotype. And it's nice for these kids to see themselves represented by something other than a dangerous criminal.